She had just finished a long day at work, the kind of day where every minute felt heavier than the last. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the streets were quieter than usual. She enjoyed the calm moments like this when the city slowed down and everything seemed almost peaceful. She adjusted her rearview mirror, straightened her posture, and turned on some soft music. It was the small comforts that helped her shake off the stress of the day. As she drove, she thought about dinner, wondering whether to cook something simple at home or grab something on the way. Her mind wandered to the small joys of life, the things that made her feel safe and content. It had been a long week, and she was looking forward to just being in her own space where she could finally relax. Suddenly, flashing lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She felt her heart skip a beat. The red and blue lights were unmistakable. She knew she was being pulled over. She calmly signaled to the side of the road and carefully brought her car to a stop. The sudden change in her routine made her tense, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had done nothing wrong, and she needed to handle this carefully. The police car pulled in behind her, and two officers stepped out. They walked toward her car with a sense of authority that made her uneasy. She rolled down her window and greeted them politely, trying to keep her voice steady even though she felt her hands trembling slightly. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" she asked, keeping her eyes on them and her hands visible on the steering wheel. The first officer didn't answer right away. He looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" he asked in a tone that wasn't friendly. She shook her head slowly. "No, officer. I'm not sure. I've been following all traffic rules." She tried to keep her voice calm and respectful, hoping that politeness would help the situation. The second officer stepped closer, peering into her car. His eyes scanned the interior, and she felt the weight of his gaze. "License and registration," he said firmly. She reached into her purse and carefully handed over the documents. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. Something about their manner seemed off. They weren't just checking her papers. They were looking for a reason to escalate the situation. As the officers examined her documents, she noticed the first officer glancing at her repeatedly, as if he was trying to intimidate her. She took a deep breath and reminded herself not to make any sudden movements. She had read stories about situations like this, and she knew how quickly things could go wrong. "Do you know why we're asking these questions?" the first officer said after a moment. His voice was sharp, and there was an edge of accusation in it. "Your car was seen in a suspicious area." She blinked, surprised by the statement. "I'm just heading home, officer. I live nearby." "I don't understand what you mean by suspicious area." Her tone was calm, but inside, she felt a mix of fear and frustration. The second officer smirked slightly, and she could sense their intention to unsettle her. "We just need to make sure everything is in order," he said, but the words didn't match his body language. It felt like a test, and she was the one being tested. She decided to speak carefully, choosing her words with thought. "I've done nothing wrong, officers. I'm happy to answer your questions, but I'd like to know specifically what the concern is." She tried to keep her voice steady, hoping that clear communication would help. For a moment, there was silence. The officers exchanged glances, and she felt the tension rise. She noticed her surroundings, the quiet street, the fading light, and how the moment seemed suspended in time. It was just her and the officers, and the air felt heavy with unspoken suspicion. Her mind raced with thoughts. She wondered if they were judging her because of how she looked, or if this was just a routine stop that had gone wrong. She had learned to stay composed in difficult situations, and now her training in patience and awareness was being put to the test. She subtly reached for her phone, keeping it out of sight but within easy reach. She didn't want to provoke the officers, but she also knew the importance of having a record of what was happening. Her hand rested lightly on the phone, ready to make a call if needed. "Are you carrying anything illegal in your car?" the first officer asked suddenly. His voice had a sharper edge now, and the question seemed designed to intimidate rather than inquire. She shook her head firmly. "No, officer. I don't have anything illegal. I've been driving safely and following the law." The officers didn't respond immediately. Instead, they continued to scrutinize her documents and mutter among themselves. She stayed calm, keeping her hands on the steering wheel, taking slow breaths to steady her nerves. She knew that staying composed was her best defense. Minutes felt like hours as she waited. Every movement from the officers was deliberate, almost theatrical. She noticed a car passing by slowly, and the driver glanced at the scene, curiosity evident in their expression. She hoped they weren't just witnesses to a problem, but could serve as impartial eyes if anything escalated. She decided to make a discreet call. Her friend had always advised her to let someone know if a situation felt uncomfortable with the police. She tapped the phone, keeping the conversation quiet. "Hi, I just got pulled over. The officers are being aggressive and I feel uneasy. I'm staying calm, but I want someone to know what's happening," she said softly, careful not to provoke the officers. The friend on the other end listened attentively, reassuring her and telling her to remain calm and polite. This small connection gave her a sense of security, like she wasn't alone. She felt a little more grounded, knowing that someone else was aware of the situation. The officers finally looked back at her. "Do you understand why we pulled you over?" the first one asked, but it was clear he expected a defensive answer. She maintained eye contact, steady and unflinching. "No, officer. I'm here following your instructions, and I would like to understand why this stop is happening." Her voice was calm but firm, asserting her right to clarity. They exchanged glances again, and she could feel the tension in the air thickening. She realized that this was more than a routine stop. It felt personal, as if her mere presence had triggered suspicion. She reminded herself to stay rational and not react emotionally, even though fear and frustration were bubbling inside. Time seemed to slow down. She thought about her family, her work, and the life she had outside of this moment. She focused on staying calm, using each breath to steady herself. Every second counted, and she knew that her reaction could change the outcome of this encounter. She subtly adjusted her seatbelt, a small movement to show she was alert, but not threatening. Her phone remained in her hand, ready to document or call if necessary. She felt a sense of resolve building within her. She would not be intimidated, but she would also not escalate the situation. The first officer finally spoke again. "We're just going to verify some information," he said, though his tone suggested they were enjoying the power of control more than anything else. She nodded slowly, complying without hesitation. Her mind worked quickly, thinking about what to do next, how to maintain composure, and how to ensure that the situation didn't get worse. She remembered all the advice she had been given about encounters like this and applied it in real time. The quiet of the street contrasted sharply with the tension inside her car. She could hear distant traffic, the faint hum of city life, and yet all she felt was the focus on the officers and the stop. Her senses were heightened, noticing every small movement, every tone of voice. Minutes passed, and she realized that her calm demeanor was affecting the officers. Their attempts at intimidation seemed less effective as she remained polite, cooperative, and assertive without aggression. She understood the power of composure, and it gave her a sense of control in a situation that initially felt completely out of control. Finally, she spoke again, carefully. "I am happy to answer questions and cooperate, but I would like to understand specifically why I was stopped. I want to make sure everything is clear and correct." Her tone was steady, professional, and unyielding. The officers paused, as if caught off guard by her calm and measured response. She realized that her presence of mind was her strongest ally. The sun had almost completely set now, casting long shadows across the street, and she felt the weight of the day finally pressing down. But in that weight she found a strange clarity and determination to see this encounter through safely and with dignity. This was only the beginning of a tense, challenging situation. But she was ready. Ready to protect herself, ready to assert her rights, and ready to make sure that the truth of what was happening would be known. The night was still young, but she knew that her calm, careful actions would matter more than anything else as the encounter continued. The air around her car felt heavier now. Every sound seemed louder. The distant hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the soft click of the officers' shoes on the pavement. She could sense the shift in their energy, how their curiosity had turned into suspicion, and their words carried a sharper edge than before. She kept her hands visible, resting calmly on the steering wheel, while her mind raced with thoughts about how to handle the situation carefully. She knew she had to remain composed, but it was harder with every passing second. "Do you have anything illegal in your car?" one officer asked again, his voice carrying a hint of accusation that made her chest tighten. She shook her head and spoke slowly. "No, officer. I have nothing illegal in my car. I'm just heading home." Her tone was calm but firm, refusing to be intimidated. The other officer leaned slightly toward the window, glancing around as if he was searching for something to use against her. "Are you sure about that?" "We have reason to check your vehicle," he said. His words weren't just questions, they were statements meant to unsettle her. She felt her pulse quicken but forced herself to breathe slowly. She had learned that panic would only give them an advantage. She subtly reached for her phone again, holding it just out of sight. She didn't want to anger them, but she knew it was important to have a record of the interaction. A small sense of control returned with the simple act of being prepared. She tapped her phone lightly, ensuring that the camera was ready and the microphone was on. Every second counted now, and she needed to make sure she was protected. The officers continued to scrutinize her documents, murmuring to each other in low voices. She tried to listen, hoping to understand the reason behind the stop. They seemed to be searching for any excuse, any minor mistake to escalate the encounter. She reminded herself that staying polite and cooperative was her best strategy. Anger or fear would only make the situation worse. "Step out of the car," the first officer said suddenly. His voice was sharper now, leaving no room for negotiation. She froze for a moment, her mind weighing the risks. She knew that complying could sometimes prevent escalation, but she also knew it could be used against her. She decided to remain calm and clarify her rights. "Officer, may I ask why you want me to step out?" "I'm cooperating and I want to understand the reason for this stop." Her voice was steady, calm and assertive. The officer hesitated, and she noticed a flicker of frustration in his eyes. He motioned toward the front of the car, repeating his request. She slowly unbuckled her seatbelt, keeping her hands visible, and stepped out of the car. Her movements were deliberate and careful, showing compliance without aggression. Every step was measured, her mind alert to every gesture and word from the officers. As she stood outside, the evening air felt cooler against her skin. She kept her phone in one hand, holding it discreetly, ready to document if necessary. The officers circled her car, checking the trunk and interior, speaking in low tones to each other. She watched closely, noticing the way they moved, how their attention shifted, and the growing tension in the air. "Do you live around here?" the first officer asked, trying to dig for more personal information. She nodded. "Yes, officer. I'm just a few blocks from here. I'm heading home." She kept her tone calm, refusing to give them a reason to escalate their behavior. She sensed their eyes on her, scanning every detail, searching for a way to assert power. She decided it was time to keep someone else informed. She dialed a family member on her phone, keeping her voice low but clear. "I've been pulled over. The officers are being aggressive and I'm outside of my car now." "I'm staying calm, but I want you to know what's happening," she said. Her words were deliberate, ensuring that someone else was aware in case things went wrong. The connection gave her a sense of grounding. She wasn't alone in this moment. The officer glanced at her phone but didn't react aggressively. Perhaps he understood she was aware of her rights, or perhaps he was distracted by their own discussion. She remained steady, holding her phone at her side, ready to record or call for help if needed. The presence of another person, even remotely, strengthened her confidence and composure. Minutes stretched on. The officer's tone and body language became more intrusive. One of them began to ask repetitive questions, seemingly trying to unsettle her with minor contradictions. She answered carefully, staying consistent and polite. She could feel the officer's frustration building, but she refused to show any sign of fear. She focused on her breathing, grounding herself in the present and maintaining a calm demeanor. Her thoughts briefly wandered to the injustice of the situation. She had committed no crime, followed all the rules, and yet she was being treated as a suspect. The unfairness of it weighed on her, but she reminded herself that anger would not help. She needed clarity, calmness, and presence of mind. The first officer's questions became more invasive, probing into her personal life and routines. She answered each question succinctly, refusing to be drawn into unnecessary details. She noticed a car drive slowly by, the driver glancing at the scene. The presence of a bystander reminded her of the importance of remaining composed and collected. Every action and word mattered now, and she knew that keeping her dignity intact was crucial. She continued to document silently, taking note of every word and gesture. Her mind was sharp, aware of every shift in tone and posture. She was determined not to let intimidation affect her judgment. She felt a mix of fear and resolve, but she focused on the facts, not the emotions. The night was tense, but she had a plan. Stay calm, stay polite, and document everything. Suddenly, the first officer moved closer, lowering his voice. "We might need to search your vehicle. Do you have anything to hide?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No, officer. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing illegal in my car." Her tone was firm but respectful, showing cooperation without submission. The officer glanced at his partner, and for a brief moment, she saw the frustration in their eyes. They were struggling to justify their actions, and her calm, consistent responses were making it harder for them to escalate. She felt a small sense of relief, realizing that her composure was giving her an edge in a situation where it mattered most. She decided to reinforce the presence of her support network. "I'm on the phone with a family member right now," she said calmly. "I want to make sure everything is clear and safe for everyone." The officers paused, perhaps recognizing the seriousness of her documentation. The tension shifted slightly, and she felt the balance of power tilt just a little toward reason. Hours could have passed in that moment, though it was only minutes. She stayed focused, aware of every detail, every subtle shift in the officer's behavior. She kept her body relaxed but alert, her voice steady and her mind sharp. She understood that staying composed was the only way to protect herself and assert her rights. The officer's behavior began to show cracks. Their questions were less confident, their tone slightly less sharp. She remained polite, cooperative, and calm, refusing to give them an excuse to escalate further. Every word she spoke was measured, every gesture intentional. She had learned that patience and clarity were her strongest allies. The night continued, the sky darkening further. She could feel the fatigue from the day creeping in, but she refused to let it affect her vigilance. The street remained quiet, the occasional distant sound of traffic the only interruption. She focused on the immediate moment, the interaction and the documentation, knowing that her careful approach would protect her. Finally, she felt a small shift. One of the officers stepped back, their posture slightly less aggressive. She realized that her calm, composed approach, combined with her careful documentation and the presence of a witness on the phone, was making a difference. She had maintained her dignity, her rights, and her safety in a situation that could have easily escalated. The tension had not disappeared, but she had established a boundary. She had asserted herself with respect and calmness, showing that she would not be intimidated, but also that she was cooperative and aware. The night was still young, but she had survived the most intense part of the encounter. Her mind was alert, her heart steady, and she was ready for whatever came next, knowing that her courage and careful actions had already made a significant impact. The night had deepened, and the streetlights cast long, thin shadows across the quiet road. The woman stood near her car, alert and aware of every movement around her. The tension between her and the officers was palpable, a heavy weight that pressed on her chest. She stayed composed, keeping her phone ready, her eyes scanning the surroundings and her hands relaxed but visible. The officers, meanwhile, continued their discussion, their voices low but tense, and she could sense the frustration building in them. As the officers moved closer to her car, she noticed their behavior becoming more erratic. One of them reached toward the door as if to inspect it without permission. She quickly but calmly moved a step back, keeping her hands visible and saying, "Officer, I am happy to cooperate, but please don't touch my car without explanation." Her voice was steady and polite, but it carried a firm tone that made it clear she knew her rights. The first officer paused, seemingly caught off guard by her assertiveness. He muttered something to his partner, and she took a careful mental note of every word. Every movement, every hesitation was a piece of evidence in her mind, a record of what was happening. She had learned that documenting such encounters was crucial, and she felt a small sense of empowerment in knowing she was actively protecting herself. The second officer began to circle the car, shining a flashlight into the interior. The light flickered across her face and hands, and she felt the intensity of his gaze. She took a slow, deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. She knew that fear could make the situation worse, and she refused to let it control her actions. She raised her phone slightly, just enough to ensure it was recording without being provocative. The subtle movement gave her confidence, a quiet reassurance that the truth of the interaction was being preserved. She spoke softly into the phone, narrating the situation just enough to capture the facts. The officers are inspecting my car. I have done nothing wrong. I am staying calm and cooperative. The first officer returned her documents, but his demeanor had shifted. There was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and he seemed to be measuring her responses carefully. He asked another question, probing into her personal life, trying to unsettle her. "Where exactly do you live, V?" he asked. She answered calmly, giving only the necessary information. "I live a few blocks from here. I'm just heading home." Her tone remained polite but resolute, showing that she would not be drawn into unnecessary details. She could feel the officer's frustration growing. Their questions became repetitive, almost mechanical, as if they were testing her patience. She stayed composed, answering consistently and politely, refusing to show fear or anger. She could sense that their attempts to intimidate her were losing effectiveness. Her calm demeanor, combined with her careful documentation, was creating a barrier they could not easily penetrate. Suddenly, one of the officers moved closer, his posture more aggressive than before. He spoke in a lowered voice, trying to make her uneasy. "We might need to take further action if you don't cooperate," he said. She stood her ground, her voice steady and clear. "I am cooperating, officer. I want to understand exactly why this stop is happening and how I can comply." The words seemed to have an impact. The officer hesitated, and she noticed the subtle shift in their body language. Her calm, assertive approach was making it difficult for them to escalate the situation without appearing unreasonable. She felt a small surge of relief, realizing that maintaining her composure was not only protecting her, but also influencing the officer's behavior. She continued to narrate quietly into her phone, capturing every detail. "The officers are asking questions about my personal life and inspecting my car. I am remaining calm and cooperative. They are showing signs of frustration." The act of speaking the facts aloud helped her focus, turning anxiety into clarity. She felt a sense of control returning, however small, in the midst of the tension. A few moments later, a car drove slowly by, the driver glancing at the scene. She felt reassured by the presence of a bystander, knowing that someone else was witnessing the interaction. The officers noticed the attention as well, and their movements became slightly more restrained. She realized that the visibility of the situation was beginning to influence their behavior. The first officer asked another question, his tone slightly less sharp. "Do you have anything else in your car we should know about?" She shook her head, her voice calm and unwavering. "No, officer. There is nothing else. I have done nothing wrong and have nothing illegal in my car." Her clarity and consistency were tools she used to maintain her composure and assert her rights. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, glancing at his partner. She noticed the hesitation and recognized it as a sign of their growing uncertainty. Her calm, consistent responses were making it harder for them to justify any further aggressive actions. She felt a small sense of reassurance, knowing that her careful approach was working. She decided to reinforce the presence of support on the phone. "I am on the line with a family member and they are aware of what is happening," she said softly but firmly. "I am staying calm and cooperative." The officers paused as if realizing that her documentation and external witness were factors they could not ignore. The tension in the air remained, but the balance of control was subtly shifting in her favor. Time seemed to stretch, each moment heavy with unspoken tension. She focused on her breathing, grounding herself in the present and maintaining a calm, alert stance. She observed the officers carefully, noting every gesture, every shift in tone, every subtle signal of frustration. Her awareness was her shield, her presence of mind her armor. The officers' questions became less forceful, their tone slightly more measured. She remained polite, answering succinctly and consistently. Her calm composure, combined with the careful recording on her phone, created a record that could not be easily dismissed. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that she was actively protecting herself while maintaining dignity and respect. The first officer stepped back slightly, his aggressive posture softened. She recognized the effect of her composure, her careful words, and the subtle presence of support through the phone call. She had established a boundary, showing that she would not be intimidated but was willing to cooperate fully within her rights. The second officer glanced around, seemingly reassessing the situation. Her careful attention to every detail had created a shift in the dynamics. They were no longer in full control, and she could sense the frustration in their subtle movements. Her calm, measured approach was making them uncomfortable, and she understood that patience and composure were her most powerful tools. She took a slow breath, feeling a small measure of relief. The immediate tension had not disappeared, but she had created space for reason and clarity. Her actions were deliberate, her words consistent, and her presence assertive without aggression. The night was still unfolding, but she had maintained her dignity, safety, and rights through careful awareness and calm composure. Minutes later, one officer finally spoke, his voice slightly less sharp. "We just need to verify some details before you can leave," he said. She nodded slowly, understanding that patience was still necessary. "I understand, officer. I am happy to provide the information needed and remain cooperative," she replied, her tone calm and steady. The officers continued their checks, their movements slower and more deliberate. Her composure remained unwavering, her focus on documenting and staying alert. She knew that this encounter was far from over, but she had established her presence, her awareness, and her dignity. She felt a sense of quiet determination, knowing that she was actively protecting herself and asserting her rights. The night air was cool against her skin, the quiet of the street providing a backdrop to the tense encounter. She remained vigilant, aware of every detail, every tone, every subtle shift in behavior. She continued to narrate quietly into her phone, preserving the truth of the situation and reinforcing her awareness and presence. Eventually, she noticed a small change in the officer's demeanor. Their tone was less aggressive, their questions more measured. She recognized the effect of her consistent composure, her careful documentation, and the quiet presence of support on the phone. She had maintained control over her actions, her words, and her awareness, and it was beginning to influence the officer's behavior. She took another deep breath, feeling the weight of the night and the tension around her. She had faced a challenging, unjust situation with calmness, clarity, and careful awareness. The immediate threat had not vanished, but she had established her dignity, her rights, and her safety through deliberate, composed action. The night continued, but she was ready for whatever came next. Her mind sharp, her heart steady, and her presence unwavering. After what felt like hours, though it had only been a tense stretch of minutes, the officers seemed to reach a point of uncertainty. Their questions became fewer and their tone less sharp. She remained standing, her posture calm and composed, her phone still recording every moment. The presence of evidence, along with the quiet support of the person on the other end of the phone, seemed to weigh heavily on the officer's decision-making. Finally, the first officer spoke, his voice softer than before. "We're going to let you go for now, but we may follow up later." She nodded slowly, keeping her hands visible, and replied politely, "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your explanation." She stepped back toward her car, still cautious, her senses alert to any sudden movements. As she buckled herself in and adjusted her seatbelt, she felt a wave of relief mixed with lingering anxiety. She had navigated a situation that could have escalated dangerously, and her calm, collected actions had made a difference. She took a deep breath and started the car, signaling back onto the road carefully. Even though the immediate confrontation had ended, she knew that what happened tonight would not simply disappear. The experience had left a mark, and she understood the importance of ensuring accountability. Once she was safely out of the officer's sight, she called the person she had spoken to earlier. Her voice was steadier now, though still carrying the echoes of the stress she had endured. "I'm okay. They let me go. I'm heading home now," she said. She recounted every detail of the encounter, explaining the questions, the behavior of the officers, and the tension she had felt throughout. The act of sharing the story made it feel less heavy, like putting words to the experience helped release some of the fear and frustration she had carried. She stopped at a quiet corner to gather her thoughts. The streetlights reflected off the pavement, creating small pools of light in the darkened road. She thought about how quickly a routine drive had turned into a situation filled with intimidation and fear. The memory of the officer's aggressive stance, the repeated questioning, and the invasive manner in which they tried to assert control stayed vivid in her mind. But she also remembered her own actions, the calm voice, the careful documentation, and the conscious effort to remain composed. She realized that she had acted with courage, using her presence of mind to protect herself. After a moment, she decided it was time to make the incident known. She reached out to a local civil rights organization that had experience with situations like this. She spoke calmly, providing all the details, explaining what had happened, and sharing the recordings she had made. She explained that the officer's actions had felt aggressive, discriminatory, and unprovoked. The organization listened attentively, asking clarifying questions and assuring her that they would take the necessary steps to investigate and ensure accountability. The process of reporting gave her a sense of empowerment. She realized that while the encounter had been frightening, she had also created the tools necessary to ensure that the truth would be acknowledged. Her careful documentation, her composure during the stop, and the presence of a witness on the phone had all contributed to creating an accurate record of what occurred. She felt a quiet pride in knowing that she had not let fear dictate her actions. In the days that followed, the recordings and her detailed account were shared with local authorities and media outlets. The response was immediate. People expressed outrage, recognizing the injustice and the aggressive behavior displayed during the stop. Support poured in from friends, family, and members of the community. The woman was touched by the concern and encouragement she received, understanding that her experience resonated with many who had faced similar situations. The internal investigation began swiftly. Authorities reviewed the recordings, assessed the officer's behavior, and spoke to witnesses who had seen portions of the encounter. It became clear that the officers had violated protocol, using intimidation and aggressive questioning without cause. Their actions were deemed unprofessional and discriminatory, leading to disciplinary measures being considered. Throughout this time, the woman continued to stay grounded. She focused on her daily life, work, and the small moments of peace she could reclaim, all while knowing that she had taken the right steps to ensure accountability. She reflected on the importance of remaining composed and clear-headed in difficult situations, understanding that courage could take many forms, including patience, documentation, and careful communication. The story began to spread through local news channels and social media. People admired her calm response and the way she had handled the situation, drawing attention to the broader issues of discrimination and misuse of authority. Her decision to record and report the encounter served as a powerful example of how individuals could protect themselves and seek justice even in moments of vulnerability. She received messages of support from people who had experienced similar stops or had friends and family who had faced unjust treatment. The shared experiences created a sense of solidarity and community, reinforcing the notion that documenting injustice and seeking help could lead to meaningful change. She realized that while the encounter had been personal, its implications reached far beyond her own experience. As the investigation continued, the officers involved were placed on administrative leave. Internal reviews confirmed that their behavior had been inappropriate, and discussions about further disciplinary action began. The woman remained focused on the facts, sharing what she knew and cooperating fully with the process. Her calm, deliberate actions during and after the stop had ensured that the truth was heard and that justice could be pursued. The experience also led to reflections on systemic issues. She thought about the importance of awareness, advocacy, and preparation. Her presence of mind during the stop had made a difference, but she recognized that not everyone might have the tools or support to handle similar situations safely. She resolved to share her story in ways that could educate and empower others, emphasizing the importance of calm, documentation, and seeking support. In her personal life, she felt a mixture of relief, pride, and lingering unease. The immediate danger had passed, but the memory of the aggressive questioning and the intimidation lingered. She found comfort in knowing that she had acted correctly, had protected herself, and had used the experience to create a path toward accountability. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act with clarity and composure despite it. The incident also strengthened her resolve to support others in similar situations. She began participating in discussions, workshops, and awareness campaigns focused on rights during traffic stops and interactions with law enforcement. Her story became a teaching tool, showing how preparation, calmness, and documentation could make a difference in protecting oneself and promoting justice. Ultimately, the encounter was a turning point. It highlighted the importance of accountability, the power of technology and documentation, and the impact that one person's calm, deliberate actions could have in challenging situations. She felt empowered not just by surviving the encounter, but by using it to foster awareness and positive change. The officers' careers were now under scrutiny, and the investigation continued to unfold. Meanwhile, she returned to her life, carrying the lessons learned from that tense night. Her focus was on living intentionally, staying aware and advocating for fairness and justice. The experience had left a mark, but it had also reinforced her strength, resilience, and the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. She knew the road ahead would include moments of reflection, conversation, and continued vigilance. But she also knew that her actions had already made an impact, that her calm, careful approach had preserved her safety, documented the truth, and contributed to the pursuit of justice. The night had been challenging, the fear real, but her courage, composure, and deliberate choices had turned a frightening encounter into a story of empowerment, accountability, and hope. The days after the traffic stop felt surreal. She returned to her routine, but the memory of that night lingered in her mind like a shadow. Every time she thought about the aggressive tone of the officers or the way they had tried to intimidate her, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Yet, alongside the fear, there was a growing sense of empowerment. She had faced a situation that could have turned dangerous, and she had emerged with her dignity and rights intact. The investigations into the officers' actions moved quickly. The recordings she had made, combined with her clear recounting of events and the witness statements, painted a vivid picture of misconduct. Authorities could no longer deny the aggressive and discriminatory behavior displayed during the stop. The woman had done what so many feared to do in those moments. She had documented, she had reported, and she had stood firm. Soon, news outlets picked up the story. The headline captured the public's attention. A routine traffic stop had escalated, but one woman's calm and quick thinking had exposed serious wrongdoing. Her story resonated deeply with many who had faced similar situations, and it sparked discussions about accountability, the power of evidence, and the experiences of Black individuals during police interactions. She found herself receiving messages of support from strangers, friends, and community leaders. Some shared their own experiences, validating her feelings and highlighting the common struggles people face. Others offered practical advice, expressing admiration for the courage and composure she had maintained during the encounter. The outpouring of support reinforced a sense of community and solidarity, showing her that her actions mattered far beyond her own immediate safety. The officers involved faced immediate consequences. They were removed from duty pending investigation, and discussions of disciplinary action and termination began. The recordings and statements were examined in detail, revealing clear violations of protocol and abuse of authority. The process was thorough, and each step reinforced the idea that actions had consequences and accountability was possible. For the woman, the legal and public processes were both stressful and relieving. Stressful because reliving the encounter, recounting the details repeatedly and seeing public attention on her experience could be exhausting. Relieving because the truth was being heard, and the officer's behavior was being scrutinized and addressed. She continued to cooperate fully, providing any additional information requested, and ensuring that the documentation she had carefully created would support justice. She reflected often on the power of preparedness. The simple acts of keeping her hands visible, documenting the interaction on her phone, and remaining calm under pressure had made a difference. She realized that these actions were not just protective measures, they were tools for accountability. Every choice she had made during the stop contributed to creating a clear record that could not be ignored.